Hello, my name is Rebecca Tost, and in this presentation, I will be going over my final project for EDU 598 through Wilson College. The name of my study is The Impact of Technology-Fostered Student Choice in Analysis Tasks. I'd like to begin by going over the problems and needs that I have noticed over the past couple of years that have led me to this particular research. Since COVID, I would say I've noticed three different things that I'm really seeing as a problem in the classroom, and that is student success, difficulty with analysis, and then different student factors. So first of all, with student success, over the past couple of years, I have noticed a decline in my students' PSSA growth scores. While a large percentage of them are showing that they are proficient or advanced, their growth from 6th grade to 7th grade is not quite where I want it to be. Upon doing some research, I found that the National Report Card also showed some concerning issues with reading assessments. From 1971 to 2023, they noticed no changes in reading assessment scores for United States students. And they even noticed a little bit of an increase up to 2020, and then from 2020 to 2023, they noticed it drop right back down to that same level it was at from 1971, so over 50 years. No real improvement there. Then the next point, analysis difficulty. The skills that we're asking these students to do are incredibly difficult. And that national report card, in looking at the different states, found that in Pennsylvania, only 36% of 8th graders showed proficiency in writing. And if you take a look over at the picture on the right-hand side here, this is PSSA scores, so statewide. If you look over in the far right-hand column there, it says percent proficient and above. So this would be the number of students who are essentially meeting our expectations for English language arts skills. We're seeing in 3rd grade, 55.8%. And then that just kind of like drops. That's the highest score we have. Once they reach me in 7th grade statewide, we're seeing 53.4% proficient and above. And in 8th grade, only 52.2%. Also, on a personal level, some observations with student factors that I found quite concerning is, particularly since COVID, an increase in missing or late work from student. And this obviously is going to impact achievement. It's going to impact, their motivation and their engagement, obviously, in class. And then finally, I've noticed that my students have just such a wide range of learning styles and preferences that make it so incredibly difficult to pinpoint exactly what it is they need from me and how I can best provide them with the teaching instruction that they require. So all of these different factors have then led me to this research question. How does technology-assisted student choice of assessment method affect student achievement on analysis tasks? And my hypothesis ultimately is that student choice facilitated by that technology will improve achievement on analysis tasks. So the limitations of this study are obviously numerous here. First of all, in regards to my population, they are not representative of Pennsylvania students. They are not representative of United States students. So the results of this study will not be able to be generalized. It's also a rather small sample size with only 75 students to select from. In terms of the analysis assessment that I'm going to be doing as well, there is some subjectivity and bias that can come into play because I am using a rubric. And any scorer who's using a rubric, there's always some subjectivity there, some interpretation there, and scorer preferences can come into play. Then, with the way that I am designing this particular study, it is a comparison from multiple units. So I'm not comparing two groups of students to each other, but rather how students perceive and how I'm seeing achievement across multiple units. So some prompts from unit to unit might be easier. And so we could see some analysis tasks vary because of that. Also, these units are not conducted simultaneously, so students, as they go throughout the school year, will ideally be learning and improving. And so we might see our later units doing well compared to our earlier units. And then finally, because the text will vary, the difficulty of the text and the student engagement with the text might vary as well. All right, in the literature, I think it's important to look at the three different factors independently. So we're going to take a look at analysis and writing, student choice, and then also technology, just to see what the literature is saying out there. So first of all, in this analysis and writing portion of the literature review, over on the right-hand side, I do have the Bloom's taxonomy pyramid. This is important in taking a look at analysis, because a lot of times when we talk about what analysis is, we come back to Bloom's taxonomy, which was created in 1956. Essentially, Bloom's taxonomy described analysis as taking some sort of text or process or end result and breaking it down into its different constituent parts, then looking at the relationships among those elements, and trying to find the structural or organizational principles that put it all together to draw some sort of conclusion from that text. So that is what I will be basing my analysis off of as well. And that's what we see the PSSA looking at, and the Pennsylvania Department of Education really kind of basing their definition of analysis around as well. Something interesting to note, and this is the first bullet point here, is a recent trend that we've seen in education, which is looking at writing to learn. So instead of evaluating writing as sort of the end result of learning, instead seeing it also as a process with which students can continue to learn. And Klein and Boscolo in 2016 did take a look at this, and through their study, they found that writing actually increased reading comprehension. And what's interesting, connects to our next bullet point here, is that they saw that trend continue even with different types of writing, not just with traditional essay formats. And with this multimodal writing, which will be a component of the different analysis options that students are provided, if we do research online, you will find so many different websites that find alternatives to writing a traditional essay. One of the valuable websites I've used is Indiana University, which has a giant list of different things you can do aside from a traditional essay in order to assess analysis skills. I also read an article by Amy Cummins from 2009 where she discussed how essentially in the modern workforce, we really need to ensure that students are writing in non-traditional methods, because that's what they will use beyond their schooling. There are then also some different studies out there and some different people's opinions ultimately on how to evaluate these assessments based on analysis. And it all comes down to essentially focusing in on the thinking tasks that students are doing and not on the structural format. So really focusing in on whether or not they can conduct the analysis, whether they're appealing to the audience, and whether or not they're making meaning from the text that they read, as opposed to, do they have 5 paragraphs, which obviously would not be well aligned with this particular research study. The next factor that we want to look at is student choice. And there are a lot of different studies that have been conducted with student choice. Not so many on writing, but there was a very interesting one from 2019, a person named Van Warren, who looked at younger students, so 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, to determine whether or not choice in writing prompt improved their writing. And what they found was that students did write more words in a 5-minute period when they were provided choice of writing prompt. But there was some mixed results about whether or not their grammar improved. Now, obviously that does not necessarily equate to the quality of the writing, but they did try to quantify it, which I appreciated. In terms of motivation, we have some mixed results. So there was a person named Patel who was incredibly interested in student choice. And so there are 2 different things I'll be talking about here. The first one is Patel et al. With a 2010 study that they conducted. And in that study, where they gave students different choices amongst homework assignments, they did find that there was an increase in motivation when they were given that choice. Patel also did a meta-analysis 2 years earlier in 2008. And in that one, where they looked at, I think it was 48 different studies, they found a significant positive impact on motivation anytime choice was involved. So I find that one incredibly valuable to look at and to reference. In regards to achievement, Patel et al. In their 2010 study also found that test scores were higher with choice, but then you'll see kind of mixed results out there. A study from 2003 by Flowerday and Shaw found that the choice led to no change in cognitive engagement with students, and that when students were provided choice, they actually put in less effort. Some other interesting things to note about the literature out there regarding student choice is Irwin and Heppelstone in 2012 looked at a whole bunch of different factors regarding student choice in assessment. And they found that it can actually act to counteract barriers, particularly for special education students. So if they are struggling with a particular format or skill or method for communicating their ideas, if they have choice and they can select something where there is no barrier for them, that can show amazing improvement in their scores. And yet one of the things that they found that was not so positive was students can also show a pattern for avoiding potentially things that they do not like. And then finally, a study that is not connected to students but is important nonetheless is from Chernev et al. From 2015 that discussed choice overload. So there definitely is a balance between providing some choice and the benefits it can provide versus providing too much choice and then overwhelming students to the point where it can become negative for their ultimate productivity. Finally, in terms of technology, there's a lot of positive research out there about the effects of technology, but two that I would like to focus on that dealt with achievement. The first was from Gulick and Demertis in 2005, where they looked at a laptop program that had been incorporated within a school district, and they found that students who had access to a laptop within the curriculum showed increases in their GPA, their class grades, and on standardized assessments. In 2004, there was an interesting study from Kandikori et al., which was a very small study and based on math, but interesting nonetheless, where they looked at student achievement from a pre-test to a post-test when they were given instruction on a paper packet versus through adaptive technology through Khan Academy. And they found that the students who had the paper had an 8.3% improvement from the pre-test to post-test, but students who used the adaptive program showed a 24.2% improvement. So some studies there definitely demonstrating the power of technology. For my own study now, again, I will be selecting from 75 seventh graders. This is a convenient sample of my own students. They are more male heavy with 43 males and 32 females. I do have 2 English language learners, 4 IEP students, 3 students with a 504 or Chapter 14 plan, and then 10 students who are labeled as gifted. The setting for this study will be in the ELA classroom in a Pennsylvania suburban school district. My school district is medium-sized with almost 2,000 students and about 25% economically disadvantaged. For my research study, what I'll be doing is developing 4 different short story units that start with a short story. Students are then given, different instruction and tasks that deal with specific ELA content like mood or tone or characterization, and then end with a final assessment that asks them to do analysis. In 2 of those short story units, the final analysis task will provide choice within the format that students can conduct their analysis. And then 2 of those units will provide no choice, and students will be told what analysis task they will be doing. Once those 4 short story units are completed, students will complete a survey that asks them about their perceptions on choice and their achievement. Their achievement will also be assessed then by me using a rubric that is consistent from unit to unit. I will evaluate their submission rate, so how often they submitted their assignments on time, compared from the choice units to the no choice units. And then finally, I'll take a look at their PSSA results, particularly that text-dependent analysis essay score. And since all of these students will be conducting the same, units, I can't compare them to themselves or to one another, but instead I must compare them to previous year's results. So in order to analyze this data For the survey, for the closed questions, I'll be looking at the mean and mode results to determine if there's any kind of patterns there. For the open-ended question, I'll look at theme analysis to see what patterns emerge from student responses. For the achievement, where they're completing an analysis task and I'm grading it using a rubric, I'll use a t-test paired sample to compare how students performed in the choice units versus those no choice units. And then the submission rates is very similar. I'll use a t-test paired samples to compare how students did in terms of submitting their assignments on time in the choice units versus submitting their assignments on time in those no choice units. And then finally, the last piece of evidence that I will collect are those PSSA results. Because I'm comparing this group to another group of students, I will use a t-test independent samples to compare that 24-25 TDA scores versus the prior years. And then ultimately, again, I'm determining, or I'm hypothesizing at this point, that this data will ultimately show that providing students choice within their analysis assignments will ultimately lead to improvements in achievement scores. So if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. Thank you very much.